Good morning, St. Francis. Good morning, people of God. It is Tuesday, the 10th day of June, 2025. It is now Tuesday of the 10th week of the year, the 10th week in Ordinary Time. We have finally now have our first day back within Ordinary Time after again descending the heights of Easter. So as we begin to make our way through summer Ordinary Time, again in the Northern Hemisphere, in the Southern Hemisphere we're moving into winter Ordinary Time. But in this time of the year, again, it is for us now to move into what it means to live this life as a believer in the world, again, in light of what resurrection has caused. We are not forgetting the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. We are not going back basically to waiting for him to be crucified again. We are not putting him back onto a cross again, because again, in doing all these kinds of things, we basically give a lie to the power of resurrection, and we basically eclipse its power and do not recognize its power, and we are not called to do that. We cannot do that. And so we fall back into ordinary time, and we fall back into ordinary time kind of in sort of a startling way. If we remember all the way back to March, when we began Lent on March the 5th this year, our last day of Ordinary Time on that Tuesday, on Mardi Gras, on Fat Tuesday, the first reading was from Sirach. Again, in Sirach, again, giving us pithy maxims of how to live, again, as believers, how to live as children, as sons and daughters of God. Now we pick up Ordinary Time in the middle of Second Corinthians, and again, so it's sort of like a startling kind of landing. How do we get here? Where do we go? And what goes on? But again, Second Corinthians today, the reading today, again, kind of puts us in good place, for moving from Easter and the impact of Easter, and to now living it, in our lives throughout the rest of this year. Basically, Paul talks about to the Corinthians that God is not a yes and a no. God is always a yes, always a constant yes. And to remember that yes, that is God's. Yeah, a yes for us, a yes for our future, a yes for our destiny, a yes for our lives as believers, a yes for our hope, a yes for our happiness, a yes for all of those things that make being human a glorious and wonderful thing. God is not about don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. Basically, God is one who says love. And again, out of that love, so many yeses can come forth, because so many yeses can be expressed, so many yeses can have the impact upon this world that these yeses need to have. To remember that, again, is another wonderful thing in keeping with resurrection, in keeping with this new life and these new courses that God has placed us on, and that the resurrection, the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ has placed us on. To remember and live out of that, as Paul tells the Corinthians, is something also important for us to remember today. In the Gospel today, I forgot where we were. I think we're in Luke. I think we're in Luke at this time. Again, we moved back into Luke, and I think that we ended when we were in Mark. In fact, I didn't look up that one. I think we were in Mark on Mardi Gras on the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday. But again, in Luke's Gospel today, or in the Gospel today, Jesus basically tells his believers to be both salt of the earth and light for the world, to give it flavor and to give it clarity. That is our mission as believers. And again, with resurrection, with the new life, with the new hope that Christ has given us in rising from the dead, that should be something we embrace. We are not called to be people who make the world dull. We are not called to be people who make the world boring. We are not called to be people who basically live in our own little bubbles, of sanctity and holiness and devotion, without ever engaging into the world. Be salt for the earth. Be salt for the world, Christ says. And that means, again, to give it an understanding and a savoriness and a beauty and a wonder and a tastiness, again, and a flavor that perhaps it can never experience, and it will never experience on its own. We are responsible for that, as well, though, as giving light and clarity, again, into the world's confusion, into its doubts, into its problems, into its ups and downs, or whatever it is. What does our faith actually present, to this world? How does our faith try to help this world understand itself better? How does what it is that we believe and how it is that we act as believers in the world show this world a different way? A way that brings life, a way that brings hope, a way that brings courage, a way that brings steadfastness, a way that brings authenticity, not only for what it means to be a believer in the world, but for also what it means to be human. A glorious and wonderful day, St. Francis and people of God. May the Lord give you his peace.